We quickly realized that one of the biggest changes that we're announcing to you is the BMP implementation. And your probably question is, how does this affect my whole farm plan? And when am I going to get that BMP or the practice that you've talked about that we've agreed upon, when am I going to get that installed on my farm? So I'm going to go through a detailed look on the annual workload development. The Watershed Ag Council and the Watershed Ag Program is contracted to follow and implement this BMP prioritization methodology that you've heard about from almost every speaker this morning. Each summer, we have a group within our office that looks at all viable BMPs that are ready to be built. We pull those into a pool and we start organizing those for implementation. So we first look at the CREP the projects that we talked about. The program and our funders have put the highest priority on this practice, and we follow that by all of the pollutant categories. Just like Larry had mentioned in his presentation, we start with 1. We address all those BMPs and projects in category 1. We continue on to 2, 3, and continue down the list. We saw this chart before, and if you organized a deck of cards, if you took the most value card, let's say diamonds, and you started organizing them, you put your ace first within your first category. Let's say that's diamonds, ace, king, queen, right on down through. Then you move on to the next most valuable deck, which is in our case category 1, and do the same. Start out with your ace. Now in your ace, king, queen, that's your farm ranking. So when you go through the farm ranking process, your farm is awarded or scores a number, and that looks at the environmental issues on that farm. What we did for 2010, we started this process in August and started looking at all of the projects and BMPs. And we actually came and scheduled BMPs to be implemented halfway down category 4. Now the prioritization and how they were arranged were actually, we could actually schedule them all the way down to the end. We could actually number the BMP and project of when it was to be built 1 through 600. Our staffing capacity, our budgetary resources, and as was mentioned earlier, the contractor base out there, we can build approximately $2.5 million per year. And in 2010, in category 1, we had 81 BMPs at the tune of a planning estimate of $150,000. So relatively small. 81 BMPs were scheduled in the CREP first category for $150,000. Category 1 was 32 BMPs at $1.6 million. So for this season that we're coming into now, 2011, we'll be installing 32 BMPs at 1.6. Categories 2 and 3, we only had 1 BMP, and that's the pesticide storage, fertilizer storage, the mixing centers. So in these 2 categories, we only had 1 BMP, and that was valued at $1,000. We moved on to category 4, which was your calf housing, pathogen control. We had 79 BMPs at $1.4 million. And then, so we have a line here, and this is our budgetary resources, $2.5 million for the season. But we continue on with our alignment and our organization, prioritization. If projects fall out of the higher prioritized projects, we'll continue right on down the list for this season's implementation. If a farm goes out of business, a producer decides they don't want the practice, they don't need it, they change their operation, we'll continue on down. Just to kind of give you an example for next year, we're projecting right now in category 1 manure storages. Right now, currently, we only have 10 practices. So that'll allow us to continue on down further on the list of organized and prioritized BMPs and practices. We talked about the farm ranking before, and the only time this really comes into play, yes, farm ranking is in every single category, but it really comes into play when we hit a category where we can only build so far. And then we organize those farms and the pollutant issues, and that's how we come up with which farms we'll work on. Now each summer, we'll redo this, we'll start this process, we'll redo this process. We'll reshuffle the deck, if you will, and we'll add in all those BMPs and projects that have been approved within that last 12-month period. So new whole farm plans that come in, revised whole farm plans that come in, repair and replacement BMPs to bring your BMPs back up to status. They'll come into that pool. We'll reshuffle that deck, and some of the lower category lower prioritized BMPs may continue to be pushed down. Now, we don't have an exact science for this yet. That's why it's very, very important that when we meet on the status reviews once a year, we look at the database. We'll look at the whole farm plans. We'll look at where you are, and we'll try to give you the best guess that we can of where your projects, especially in the lower categories, where they are. Okay? If we're working on a project, let's say this summer, you have technicians and planners, engineers come to your farm, and we start working on a practice down here. If we start working on it, surveying it, and start designing, working with you, that practice will then roll to the 2012 workload. So it doesn't get, because we started the project, we didn't get it implemented, something happened, whether, whatever, the design didn't get done, didn't get approved, had some difficulties, it'll stay in the mix. If it's still viable, still needed for the environmental issue and for your production, it'll stay right in the mix and roll over to the next year. I think that's everything on this. I'm going to summarize this morning's presentations. You've been fed a lot of data, a lot of changes in the program. Everything from how we're restructuring the program into 4 working groups. We're adding planning staff to be more responsive and more receptive to get out to you folks. We're changing a little bit from an implementation mode as we met that major milestone of SI back into a planning mode to try to get you folks back involved, to get the plans back up to snuff, to get those old BMPs included in the repair replacement program. You've heard about the repair replacement program, as Lenny mentioned. He explained that program really well. You've heard about the organization of the workload. It's a major change in how we do business. You've heard about establishing a long-term relationship, how when we started this program we really didn't know, were we a 10-year program, we'd be gone. We're now going into a very, very long program. We expect to be here for a long time. They mentioned the FAD, the 10-year FAD, also the water supply permit. We're written into that. We'll be here for a while. We want to establish new relationships and continue old relationships for a long period in the future. And you heard about some changes to the O&M agreements. We're actually looking at a longer-term relationship. It's no longer a 10-year on the BMP, and it's kind of goodbye. We're asking that you continue to operate that BMP if needed for your operation. And if it fails, if there's a failed practice or something goes wrong, we'll come back and we'll repair that, pull it back up to speed if it's needed for your operation.